the big questions that I want to raise, and these are questions that are doing the rounds, and we will be getting the expert the world is listening to also in a moment. What happened in the final moments or final seconds before the crash? Did the aircraft suffer a technical malfunction as is being suggested mid-air? Was it human error, or could it have been bird strikes a contributory factor? Is it too early to speculate as to what happened to flight AI-171? We'll try and get clues to this. Joining us now first are experts. Captain Mohan Ranganathan is a leading aviation safety expert, someone I've known for years. Sean Prorinci is a former pilot. He joins us as well. And Marco Chan is senior lecturer, aviation operations at Buckinghamshire New University. Thank you all very much for joining us. I want to come to you, Captain Ranganath, first. What's your sense? You've seen those visuals, and aviation experts are dissecting them with different theories. According to you, as of now, what is it, without speculating, that we can confirm?
See, what I can make out from the video, one, I want to emphasize, these are the CCTV footage, which are low resolution cameras and taken from a distance. So trying to zoom in and trying to isolate parts of aircraft which are blurred, we cannot conclude with definite proof that, the speculation about the flaps being retracted or, the other part. But what I can see from the angle of the liftoff, apart from what I've said earlier, one, it could be bird ingestion, though people say they don't see the birds. But if they are at low level from this distance with a low resolution camera, you cannot make out if there are birds. But you can see that the grass height is quite high. But you see at one point, just after liftoff, the body angle is shallow. It is not the usual liftoff angle, which means it is not developing the thrust that is required. So it could be either a compressor stall, or it could be due to a bird strike or foreign object ingestion into the engine, which has caused that. But one thing which a lot of people don't seem to, the Boeing design, if you look at the old manuals, the design was it flies interim speed. And when they say interim speed, it is what you use with your stab trim. So if the stab trim is used, looking at the way the nose pitches up before it stalls, I feel that they've used the stab trim to relieve the pressure in the hand. And if you relax your controls even for a second, the nose will pitch up. And that is why you have the sharp pitch up before the stall. And the angle at which you find the tail on the building, it's a clear indication that it had not flown into the building, it has stalled into the building. So now that they found the DFDR, it'll completely identify and put an end to any speculation. And I'm more interested in the CVR because all the recordings, the area recording, what the two pilots spoke or discussed during that crucial couple of minutes, and the ATC, that is what is important.
Let me stop you for a moment, Captain. I've heard you very clearly, and I think you're being very clear. I want to also go to Sean Prajitsky, former pilot. Sean, now that we've had 24 hours to digest those visuals more and more, is there any clarity? Are we any clearer today than we were yesterday as to what could have happened to the flight?
I'm not sure we really have any clarity. I think that we have, when they made the call, the Mayday call, they made the comment about no thrust and no lift. So that implies that they have a double engine failure. And this is absolutely the worst time for that to happen. What I wonder is, especially with the nose, as the gentleman had stated, as the captain has stated, that being lower, if we had one engine that failed, and you would have the nose being lower if that's the case. If you had a single engine that failed first, and then the second engine failed a few moments later, and you might see something like that with a bird strike. So they were dealing with a single engine failure, and then just a few moments later, the other engine started to wind down. The other thing that I noticed on the takeoff is that there seems to be a lot of what looks like dust or water. I'm not sure what the weather conditions were, if the runway was wet. If so, that would explain all of the debris that you see at liftoff around the aircraft. A wet runway would certainly look like that. If it was not wet,
It
and
wasn't
if
wet
it
at all.
was
It was very warm. It was a very, very warm, hot day in Ahmedabad.
okay, so it hasn't rained in the last 24 hours or so.
No.
If okay, if that's not the case, then you see the picture there. Why is all that dust lifting off around the airplane? And that made me wonder about FOD problems, foreign objects debris. I know, and I'm not sure there, but I know here in the States that we do routine drives up and down runways looking for problems on the runways because you can suck in rocks and so forth and cause engine failures. So I'm just wondering, I've seen, just like the captain here and others, we've all seen thousands of takeoffs. And I've never seen that on a runway that's a clean runway unless it's water. So I don't quite know. That looks
Okay.
unusual.
So so that's one unusual thing you've detected. Mako Chan, Senior Lecturer, Aviation Operations at Buckinghamshire University. You've also digested those images. What do you see?
Thank you for the question, and excellent to be among the gentlemen here as well. Yeah, I mean, from the video, we see a bit of alcohol dust from the runway, which I wouldn't be surprised in certain region in the world. I've operated out of India myself as well, and on takeoff with runways like these, it's quite common to get dust. But as the captain mentioned as well, the resolution is rather low to determine whether it's going to be debris or dust. But what I've observed, now I'm not going to touch on the flap extension bit because, again, the resolution is too low to verify that. But I do want to touch on the engine bit. Now, it's quite obvious the engine power wasn't sustainable for the climb to be maintained, which is why the loss of thrust made a call later on. And as you can see, it seemed to climb okay in the initial seconds, and then it really struggled. Now, we don't know whether it was a single engine failure or a dual engine failure. If it's a single engine failure, I would say usually within seconds, the aircraft would seem to yaw to the left or to the right, depending on the side of the engine. Imagine one engine being more powerful than the other. But we haven't really seen that being an obvious one. We don't actually see any smoke or any fire coming out of that either from the video. Admittedly, again, low resolution. So bird strike maybe with a lower possibility. However, I would also say the engine damage physically right away could be a lower possibility as well. Like I said, I don't really see any smoke or any fire, but perhaps we can also look into engine failure in terms of computer fault or fuel supply issue.
Right.
Now, when I say fuel supply issue, because it's internal, we can't see it from our human eyes, but we have had similar scenarios in London Heathrow Airport back in 2008 with the British Airways 777, just on the short final on the landing, where the fuel supply was actually clogged. Now, it was due to ice clogging up, would be a different scenario, but it could still lead to a fuel supply problem with fuel contamination, for example, leading to a loss of engine power. Now, not a complete loss in that case. The engine was still running,
Right.
but not at the desired power, and it actually crash landed onto a runway. Now, there were no fatalities. It was miraculous in that incident, but perhaps another engine failure issue again.
In a sense, therefore, Marco, very quickly, are you also in a sense saying Boeing will have much to answer for, given that the Dreamliner has been bandied around by Boeing as their gold standard?
Well, I would say the manufacturers, as well as the airlines, the pilots, the regulators, they all hold safety to the highest standard. We can't now all of a sudden say it's Boeing's problem. It's too early to portion blame at this stage. And remember that the point of investigation is to find out the truth for the victim's family, not to portion blame, and for us to learn from the incident to enhance safety. So yes, right now, way too early to say it's Boeing's problem. Yes, the public's image may not be as good as it was because of the 737 Maxes earlier on and the earlier settlement in the United States of legal proceeding with the Ethiopian Airlines. But remember, they are two different aircraft type, and there could be individual causes of accidents. So let's not jump into conclusion and say it is Boeing's problem.
Captain Ranganath, since it's tough to jump to any conclusions, are you reasonably confident that given the fact that the black box has now been unearthed, we will get to know exactly what happened to flight AI-171, or will this remain one of those great mysteries of aviation?
No, I expect that there's going to be some transparency this time, because I'm not commenting based on any bias, but I'm saying that usually NTSB, when they participate, they do not give a counter to the findings of the country. Like in the case of the Mangalore crash, which is completely cooked up the report, NTSB was very passive about it, though there are other factors involved there. But when it was the Silk Air crash, when the report tried to apportion blame on the rudder control of the Boeing, NTSB did intense investigation and identified that it was pilot suicide. So here, the reputation of Boeing is at stake. And I don't think the NTSB will play ball if a blame is apportioned only to the aircraft. They will go for the truth. And the DFTR will definitely show what is wrong with the aircraft, if there is one, and whatever took place at the time of the crash. So I expect the British AAIB being involved, because British citizens were also affected. They were dead.
I'm going to stop you for a moment, Captain. I'm also joined at this moment by a very special guest. His video has gone viral. Captain Steves is someone who has been tracking this for the last 24 hours. His video has now gathered millions of views. He is the one who seemed to suggest that there was something wrong with the wing flap of AI-171 among the various possibilities. Captain Steve, appreciate your joining us. I was going through your video very carefully. Give us a sense to our viewers, as you now have had more time to digest and look at the visuals very carefully. What is this wing flap theory that you believe in some way stopped the flight from getting the necessary thrust, power, and altitude?
Well, what we can observe from the video of the airplane is that, at least for the initial takeoff roll, both engines were producing sufficient thrust to go in flight. You can see that as they take off, the dirt off the side of the runways is dusting up. So they're at full power when they're taking off. They have a normal rotation. What doesn't happen after takeoff is the gear never comes up. And that would happen about 50 to 100 feet. The pilot flying would request the gear to be raised. That never happens. The aircraft shortly after that loses lift. And you could lose lift for a number of reasons. It could be a dual power loss. That's, in my mind, the least likely of the occasions, because we can see that the engines are operating fine as they do the takeoff roll. The other would be that something changed the configuration of the wing so that the flaps were not in a position to create that extra lift. If the airplane loses lift while the gear is down at that slow speed, it's going to do exactly what you saw on the video, which is it's going to begin to waddle and descend, and just you're kind of in a power on descent until it impacts the ground.
But why would that happen? Would that be because of an engine failure, because of a gear failure? What would explain that?
Well, the main issue here is the loss of lift. Now, the loss of lift could be caused by a dual engine failure or a loss of power. That's one theory. I'm saying I think that's less likely because we can see the engines operating, and we don't have any indication from the video at this point that either one of the engines stopped running. We didn't see fire coming out or sparks or smoke, nothing like that to give us an indication. The black boxes will let us know here shortly, probably within the week, if the engines lost power for some reason. What I'm saying is there's two other possibilities. They took off without the flaps set for takeoff, which is completely unlikely, because once you push the power up in an airplane 787 and the flaps are not set for takeoff, a horn goes off that's so deafening you can't hear yourself think. Then lights flash in front of you. It's inconceivable that the pilots would have continued with the takeoff roll under those circumstances. The third possibility, and this is unfortunate, but it's when they rotated and took off, everything was operating normally. It could be that when the pilot flying asked for the gear up, the other pilot mistakenly grabbed the flap handle and raised it instead of the landing gear handle and raised it. That is also a possibility, because we can see that airplane shortly after takeoff, when the gear is supposed to come up, it begins to lose lift and begins to wallow and crash. The only other possibility is that the flaps came up and those wings lost all of their lift.
The landing wheels also, right? In that video, we see the landing wheels don't go back into as the flight is taking off. They're still very much there. They haven't. How do you see? Could it be that the pilot who then signaled Mayday simply lost thrust, lost power, was losing altitude? Why would the wheels still be out there?
So what happens right as the nose wheel lifts off and the airplane begins to fly, the pilot flying will set a 2.5 degree up nose attitude, and the main mounts, the back wheels, will come off the ground. Once that happens, the other pilot says positive rate. That means you're flying and you're climbing normally. At that point, the pilot flying will say gear up, and that he commands the other pilot to grab the landing gear handle and raise the gear. Here's where it could have gone wrong. If he didn't grab the handle and raise the gear, but mistakenly grabbed the flap handle and raised it, that would start a chain of events that they couldn't recover from. And as I see the flight path of that airplane, they look completely normal until that place where they should raise the gear. But perhaps, just perhaps, this is a theory, they grabbed the wrong handle and raised the flaps instead. The flaps started coming up. The wings lost lift. Those big landing gear are still out there creating a tremendous amount of drag, and there's not enough power to overcome that. Had they been at a higher altitude and could have dropped the nose and gained some speed, they might have flown out of it, but they're at about 300 feet when all that takes place, and they simply didn't have the altitude.
The fact is there a possibility of an external object contamination? There's talk of a possible bird strike. Is that possible with both engines failing?
Absolutely. There's two possibilities that would cause both engines to fail. One is the fuel contamination theory. Although the machines that they use to put fuel in those tanks are very precise, they're very modern, and they detect any sort of water or contamination. If there's even a drop of water, the machine cuts off fueling to the airplane, so it's highly unlikely. In addition to that, there's no other airplanes at that airport complaining about contaminated fuel, so it's unlikely it was contaminated fuel. The other is it could have been a bird strike, a flock of birds, but I don't see any birds on the videos, and it would have had to be so many birds, small birds, that it would have fought out the engines. But you would see that. You'd see fire or sparks or smoke come out of the back of the engine. You don't see any of that. I don't think they hit a flock of birds.
You don't think they hit a flock of birds. You think it could be therefore something internal. And again, of course, more will be known when the black box comes in. But given the fact that the pilot was flying at 400 feet, Ahmedabad airport is 200 feet above sea level. So let's assume it's 600 feet. You're saying it was simply too low for even for the pilot to do any kind of course correction, given the fact that it had happened at such a low altitude. Am I correct?
That's correct. And so once a wing starts to lose lift for whatever reason, the only alternative the pilot has is to lower the nose and gain airspeed. That will create more lift over the wing. He didn't have the altitude to lose. If he had been at 2,000 feet, he could have lowered the nose, lost 1,000 feet, and flown out of it potentially, while raising the gear. For whatever reason, we're going to find out in the days to come why those wings lost lift, and both wings lost lift at the same time, because it just basically kind of goes over evenly. We're going to find out when the black box data gets released to us, but my theory is that maybe they raised the flaps instead of raising the gear.
Captain Steve, have you seen anything similar in your long period of tracking aviation? Have you seen something ever happen similar to this?
Well, I think the most similar parallel was the last flight of the Concorde. We've seen the video of the Concorde. Now, we know for sure that that was a power loss scenario that created the lack of lift in the wings. They were on fire. They had hit something on the runway, it created a fire. They lost power in their engines on the left-hand side of the airplane, and then they simply couldn't get enough speed to get enough lift over those wings. That we know is a power loss. This could have been a power loss. In my opinion, it probably wasn't. I think it was something else that created the loss of lift on those wings. And I'm as eager as everybody else to find out whether it was the flaps got lifted prematurely or whether it was some other thing that potentially could have caused those engines both to simultaneously stop working.
The reason I ask you that, Captain Steve, is the fact is Boeing has positioned the Dreamliner as a next generation aircraft with a very good flight safety record. This was an 11-year-old aircraft with a pilot who had done more than 8,000 hours. Do you believe, therefore, that those elements should not be considered at the moment?
Well, they should look at everything. And then one of the things that's wonderful about the aviation community is that they will look at everything. They'll inspect all of the airplanes. Every 787 on the planet is going to get looked at now real hard. And that's important. And so that ought to reassure the public that we take this stuff very seriously. Boeing takes it very seriously. All the airlines do. They will stop, do the necessary inspections to rule out things that it isn't, and maybe find out what caused this. Again, the information on the black boxes is going to be invaluable to the entire process. It will help them zoom in or narrow in on what was the potential cause. What I'm saying is it's one of three things. Either they lost both engines all at once and in a real big hurry, or they lost lift over the wings due to a misconfiguration of the flaps. Either the flaps got raised prematurely after takeoff, or they were never set properly for takeoff. The first two are very unlikely. My theory, I think, is it's sad, but time will tell whether I'm right or not.
Could the pilots have done anything different at all? Do you believe anything different could have been done given the fact that the flight was just as 400, 600 feet taking off? Could he have really done anything different? Because he was barely a few seconds after takeoff when this happens.
Well, the only thing I know for sure that they could have done differently is raise the landing gear. The landing gear is a tremendous amount of drag once you get airborne, and it needs to get raised quickly. So, all of us have flown in the back of a large airliner, and shortly after you take off, you hear the gear come up, and then the airplane pitches up real steep. Sometimes you think you're in a rocket, and you go, "Wow, I can't believe we're climbing so steeply." That's because of the increase in lift due to the reduction in drag from that gear coming up into the airplane. The gear stayed down all the time on this one. That's the only thing we know for sure, because we can see the landing gear never moves. It stays there the entire time. Reducing that drag would have made a difference. Would it made enough of a difference to save that flight? I can't say.
Could there have been a heat factor at all? It was a very warm day. Could the weight of the flight have made any difference at all?
Well, that's a factor. High, hot, and heavy is the things that the pilots look for. It's not a particularly high altitude airport, but it was hot that day. The airplane was heavy, but it wasn't at its max gross weight. But I'm here to tell you, those Boeing 787s, they can climb, and they can climb rather aggressively on a single engine at every max weight. So they could have been completely at the end of their gross weight limits and still flown out of that on a single engine. Now, if both engines go, no, there's no airplane on the planet that's going to fly out of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are we therefore saying that if you were to in some way advise the aviation community here, because there's been a lot of speculation in this country over what could have been gone wrong, and even fear that, how could a wide-bodied aircraft, Dreamliner, crash in this manner. What would you tell them? Where do you start in this investigation now?
Well, I've flown Boeing products my entire 40-year career, and I love them. And I think Boeing puts out a terrific product. Remember, this is the first accident of a 787, and it's just too early to say whether it was something wrong with the aircraft itself. There's lots of extenuating circumstances here. They're going to find out in a few days. But if I was a passenger and I wasn't a pilot, should I be afraid of flying on a Boeing or a 787? No, it's been a very reliable platform. There's too many variables in this to come to a conclusion definitively at this point. I'm thinking in the next week, though, we're going to have a real solid idea of exactly why that airplane stopped flying, why they lost lift over those wings.
One of the guests I had on the show earlier today spoke about dust on the runway. There's also been talk, one of our senior captains here spoke about the grass around the runway being higher than he thought it should be. That, of course, leading to the possibility of a bird strike, but the visuals certainly don't show that. As you say, you're looking also at the possibility of widen the flaps, open in the manner that they should have at the time that they should have, the landing gear as well. Among all these theories that are doing the rounds, in your sense, do you want to give a proportion as to which is the most likely at this stage, or is it too premature to even go down that way?
Well, a little bit of dirt or a little bit of grass is not going to cause those engines to fail, and they would have to fail immediately and completely. They would have had to been a catastrophic failure in both engines simultaneously, because those jet turbine engines produce a lot of power. And as you can see, the dirt off the side of the runway, it's being turned up by the engine. So you know they were at full power when they took off. With that being said, they would have had to fail so immediately and so completely that there would be some evidence, either a fire coming out the back or something. We don't see any of that. And so I don't think it's any of those smaller causes. Those engines would have continued to produce power, maybe reduced power, but they could have kind of limped up into the air. What hurt them was they kept the landing gear down. That's a lot of drag. Had they raised the gear and the engine's been at maybe half power, they still could have kind of flown out of it. I don't think it was a power loss. I think they changed the configuration of the wing and they lost lift.
You know, listening to you, and I was listening to your video also, which has gone viral earlier today, the sense I got is the possibility, the strong possibility of pilot error. I know that's something that at this stage, again, one can't have conclusive proof of, but is that a real possibility according to you?
Well, you can't rule anything out, and that's what the investigators will look at. They'll look at all the evidence that they can get from the black box. I think the first place they'll go is, where were the flaps set for takeoff? The next thing they'll look at is, what was the power setting for takeoff, and were they at the proper power setting? And did they lose power right after takeoff? All that stuff is data that's recorded. They'll know that almost instantaneously. Then after they rule out certain things, then they'll go and look at the secondary issues. Pilot error could be one of those. Again, it's too early to say. I'm not pointing a finger at any of the pilots. I'm just saying that's one of many possibilities for why this airplane lost lift and stopped flying.
In conclusion, how soon do you believe an inquiry like this should reach a conclusion? There's been a worry in the past that many of these inquiries have dragged on, given the fact that the black box has been recovered. Do you believe it's going to be much easier, and there is a definite timeline within which one can go beyond the speculation to get hard information on this flight?
Yeah. Well, I think they're going to know fairly quickly what they think the problem was. The issue with this is they have to be very careful and make sure that they're thorough on this, because what you don't want to do is come out with a quick answer and then turn around a few days later and go, we have to make a correction. That was wrong. That would be brutal to the families and the people that have lost loved ones. You want to make sure you get it right the first time. So I'm all about slow down. Let's just take a look at all the information. Let's rule out certain things, and then let's get together and everybody agree on what they think was the actual cause before you publish anything to the public. Make sure you get it right the first time. We're not in a big hurry. We want to know, but it's not going to bring anybody back. And so we want to get the right answer to this. And if it takes a few days to get that, then I'm fine with that waiting process.
You know, Captain, isn't that the problem of the times in which we live in? In the times we live in, everyone wants instant answers to what could be a very complex issue or could be very simple, but everyone seems to want answers within 24 hours of this horrific crash, given the magnitude of it. And that's why perhaps everyone's even looking to you on YouTube to find out what is Captain Steve saying. Does that put extra pressure on you to get it right?
Well, that's well said. People do want instantaneous answers, but again, you've got to be thorough with these things, and there are people involved in this, and make sure you get it right for their sake. And yeah, people do turn to me for answers. I'm trying to be very measured about this and say, look, this is my opinion. It's one theory of many. What we do know for sure is this: the gear never came up, and the wings lost lift. Now, how they lost lift and why the gear didn't come up, those are mysteries that will get solved, I'm sure, when they are ready to report what they have found on the black boxes.
Okay, Captain Steve, you've given us a sense of why you've sort of gathered so many eyeballs, because whatever you've said is being monitored very closely even in this country. I appreciate you joining us and taking the time off to give us a detailed explanation of the various possible theories as to why AI-171 crashed in the manner it did. My other guests are still with us, and I want to get each of them to react to what you've just heard. Captain Ranganath, why don't you start off first? Why you've just heard Captain Steve talk about the wing flap theory in particular, possibly alluding to pilot error. Do you believe that's premature at this stage, or is it one of the real possibilities?
It's premature because, as I said, the video is very low resolution, and you can't make out if the flaps were retracted or not. And as
Right.
even Steve said, if the flaps were not set for takeoff setting, you'll have the takeoff warning horn, which is very loud. So the question of
Right.
taking off without the flaps is out of question. And for me, the dust really, because the engines are very powerful. Okay, this is after the liftoff, but prior to that, the dust could have been sucked in and F40. One of the things I said. And as for the birds flying at a very low altitude, you cannot make out in this video because they'll be very close to the ground picking up the world.
I take your point. I take your point. Very quickly, 30 seconds, Sean, your sense? Are these all theories that Captain Steve has elaborated all very much on the table, including pilot error?
Absolutely. I agree with Steve. I think he laid it out very well. My comment about the dust was just answering what do I see on the video. That's all about, about potential for rocks and other things. Look, this is what I think is really important that we need to think about from a human performance standpoint, which is definitely my specialty, is that in regard to flaps and gear, confusion and so forth, is we have to remember, first of all, this happened at basically pretty much the worst time that you could have a really serious crisis in the airplane, a double engine failure or something else. That if they become extremely task loaded with dealing with something else, trying to figure out what is going on, be a double engine, loss of thrust, as they said to ATC, other things may get missed or confused. As Steve said, the flaps being pulled up instead of the gear. We've seen this countless times with accidents. I think that's a very likely possibility, but we don't know. It's a speculation, and it's one of the things, as Steve said as well. But from a human performance investigator like myself, is the CVR is going to be really important to help us understand, were they all of a sudden dealing with a huge crisis in the cockpit and other things got confused? It's already a very busy time. That's something that they're going to look at. CVR is going to help us, as well, the flight data recorder.
I'm going to leave it there. Marco, we've run out of time, but I appreciate that all of you took the time off to join me on the show tonight on this very special broadcast.